now we're going to head into panel number 3, Equitable Access. So please welcome our Keepers of the Heart for this session, Sarah Robinson Enaharo, Product Sustainability Manager at Target North America, and Jennifer Sheffield, Head of Lead Green Consulting at GB Wawa out of Israel. Thank you both.
As Ryan said, I am living in Israel, and I just want to take a moment because this really shapes my view of social equity and access and a lot of different issues. That I live and work in the Arab Society of Israel. To be clear on which community I'm talking about, 20% of Israel's population is Arab of Palestinian descent. So we call this population the 1948 Arabs or the Palestinian citizens of Israel. They identify in different ways, but politically it's a different group than the Palestinians in the West Bank or Gaza, okay? So it's a group that's in the middle of it, sort of a third entity in the dynamics going on here. But as you can imagine, things are difficult, there are tensions, and there are lots of, race issues, minority-majority relationship issues. So even though the context and the circumstances here are very different than what we see in America, the manifestation and the day-to-day experience of many of the individuals here is very similar to what the problems we face in America, as well as the challenges and opportunities for we as designers to rise up and incorporate social equity and justice issues into the built environment and into all of our endeavors. So I just wanted to make that note, and then I would like Sarah also to introduce herself before we get into our fabulous presentation.
Okay, great. I am extremely excited to co-facilitate this panel on equal access. As a Black female engineer, these conversations are extremely personal. Equal access to opportunities has not been an easy road for myself, and I'm sure for many others on this call today. I scraped my savings to volunteer at my first Green Build in 2012, and out of the 30,000 plus attendees, I think I saw about 15 people of color during that week, which was extremely discouraging. Green Build 2013, I was a scholarship recipient, which provided me the opportunity to even attend, but there is a cost associated with certification, continuing education, and networking opportunities. I've seen an increase in diversity, but there is still more work that we have to do.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So before we get into the presentations, I just wanted to offer a framework that comes from my experience in working in the Middle East, and part of my work in sustainability here includes interacting somewhat with negotiation theory. And hold on, I'll get to how it's relevant. It's that in 2006, Professor Dan Shapiro and Roger Fisher released a book called Beyond Reason, and it talks about emotions and triggers related to negotiation. And in so doing, they talked about the 5 core concerns that every human has. And I think that those 5 topics and concerns can be really interesting to think about as we hear about different proposals and solutions to solving some of our complex challenges. One is autonomy. So we all have the need to feel in control and to have some control in the decisions for our lives. Secondly is appreciation. So we have the human need to be recognized and feel valued. Third is affiliation. So we all need to feel that we belong to a group and that we are accepted by that group. Fourth is role, R-O-L-E, role. So the desire to feel fairly seen and acknowledged. And then fifth is the status. So the desire to have meaningful purpose. And those 5 things, when we don't address those, then when we ignore those, that becomes negative emotions, which turns into grievances, which turn into conflict. So as I'm listening to the presentations from earlier and continuing forward throughout the day, I'm going to be thinking about how the solutions posed address even the deepest needs at the human level for each person involved. And with that, I believe we have our first presenter on the line. So if we could have them introduce themselves as they go through into teaching us about transforming neighborhoods in Cleveland.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be joining you all this afternoon and look forward to sharing with you our team's approach to accelerating the development of inclusive and socially impactful projects that have been transforming Cleveland's neighborhoods. Today, I'm going to be joined by two of my colleagues, Steve Luca. He is the Managing Vice President of Cleveland Development Advisors, an affiliate of the Greater Cleveland Partnership, as well as Gina Cheverine, who is the Managing Vice President of Inclusive and Strategic Partnerships, also with the Greater Cleveland Partnership. And we're pleased to share how the Greater Cleveland Partnership, the largest metropolitan chamber of commerce in the United States, is striving to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth in the Greater Cleveland area. And our chamber is unique because we operate more like an economic development organization with a focus on physical development, providing energy services and management, as well as a main pillar of equity and inclusion. And we believe that creating enabling conditions for this inclusive growth is helping bridge the economic, social, and environmental gaps for sustainable development. And through extensive collaboration and exploring alternatives to current development, we're creating those avenues for inclusive and sustainable growth. So first up, we're going to hear from Gina about the work that we've been doing in equity and inclusion.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to be here and share with you a bit about what GCP is doing around social equity, particularly in our real estate division. As Nicole said, we work, GCP works both in economic development as well as functions as a chamber, and we work hard to embed equity and inclusion within all of our work. That means that GCP's Equity and Inclusion Division works not only with its chamber members on their diversity initiatives, but we also work with our colleagues across the organization to make sure that their work really is grounded in equity and social equity. And so the framework that we use is something called the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmarks Framework. And some of you may be familiar with it. It's a framework that has 14 different categories that run the gamut on everything a good DEI strategy should have within your organization. And so we not only use this to consult with our chamber members, but we also use it and rely on it heavily within our organization. And we're pulling forward today 4 of those categories that we're going to talk about: sustainability, community, government, and social responsibility, supplier diversity, and workforce inclusion. So on the community, government, and social responsibility category, when we're looking at some of the real estate investment that we do, we want to make sure that we're not just focused on the project itself, but that we're really focusing on bringing up the neighborhood with which that project is going to be located. So that could be financially supporting the Community Development Corporation in that neighborhood. It could be supporting the small businesses in that neighborhood, making sure that we're really focused on the entire surrounding area. The second piece is sustainability, and of course, we want to make sure that we're considering projects and giving preference to those projects and investing in those that have green building practices, particularly when we're looking at projects in underserved and under-resourced neighborhoods. And then thirdly, with the supplier diversity and workforce inclusion, GCP has a strong initiative around construction diversity where we want to make sure that projects in our region, particularly those that we invest in, are looking at the diversity of the workforce and the suppliers that we use on every project. So those are the pillars and the foundation for what we do our work in social equity. So I will turn that now over to Steve Luca.
We all know that green building and social equity definitely go hand in hand, and I think the USGBC Living Standard campaign definitely is recognizing that green buildings are part of that solution. But we also know that social equity isn't always at the core of an organization or a development project. And GCP's Equity and Inclusion Division has been working since 2001 to close the racial disparities in jobs, income, and wealth by growing our businesses owned by people of color and increasing workforce diversity, equity, and inclusion. And ultimately, this work is fueled by the belief that businesses and our region are definitely stronger with greater racial equity. So how are we demonstrating equity within our governance? Demonstrating the work that our Cleveland Development Advisors is doing is that they have a specific community advisory committee that's made up of low-income community representatives to oversee the new market tax credits and the programs that are coming forward. And it's really an instrumental resource in vetting the projects that come before this board, vetting them that the anticipated community impacts are consistent with providing that social equity and fulfilling the mission of the Cleveland Development Advisors.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve again with Cleveland Development Advisors. Let me just kind of give you a little background on CDA. Cleveland Development Advisors is a CDFI, a local CDFI for those of you who are familiar with community development financial institutions. We're also a long-term CDE or certified development entity that's received over $200 million of new markets allocation and deployed that allocation. But most of all, the CDA is an impact investor. And I'm sure a number of you on the phone have heard that phrase a number of times. But we really take this to heart in the way that we determine how to use our finite resources. Our investments are made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impacts along with financial sustainability and returns. So if you look at this graphic, you can really see that as we go through our process of intaking new projects and working within our communities and within the neighborhoods, these are the kinds of critical questions we're asking ourselves, are what we're looking for in projects that we can support with our incentive-based financing. The people of our community are important. So focusing on inclusive development that promotes racially equitable outcomes and job creation and wealth building within the neighborhoods, wellness, and so on is at the key of what we try to strive for throughout Cleveland. Neighborhood placemaking, of course, is something that's near and dear to us as far as attracting amenities, retail, community business services for our people to utilize. Environmental sustainability, walkability, transit-oriented development, sustainable outcomes, LEED certification, all of those things are all looked at holistically when we're looking at a project. Obviously, our fund sustainability and project feasibility is very important. We don't want projects to fail, but as we go forward, the bottom line is a multifaceted bottom line. When we look at projects, when a sponsor comes to us or the city comes to us and talks, or the neighborhood CDC speaks of their interest in getting something moved forward, one of the threshold requirements that CDA utilizes is that the project has to align with community goals and priorities. And that's it's a loosely utilized phrase, but it really means that we have to understand that from the public perspective, from the community perspective, from the city's mayor's office and the community development departments and the economic development departments, that they all feel that these projects are what we all want to see move forward so that we can work in lockstep within our community. A number of the social impacts that we are trying to strive for are the obvious ones that we all try to strive for: job creation, supporting locally, historically underrepresented businesses and entrepreneurs, improving the health and wellness of our communities and the environmental wellness of our communities with green efficiency standards, healthy food access, broadband access is a new thing that we're really trying to focus on at CDA and trying to support initiatives to allow for additional broadband access throughout a number of our communities that really don't have access at this point. We're talking about 5G right now when a lot of folks don't even have 3G. So that's another area that we really try to focus on and are trying to move forward. Projects have to be transformational, catalytic, strategic, and we're really trying to be deliberate in the types of impacts that we're trying to make. This could kind of encapsulate what CDA has done more recently, maybe over the last 5 to 7 years, with a number of what we would consider maybe socially impactful focused results. We've invested in 26 neighborhoods of the city of Cleveland. 17 of the projects that we've done were LEED or equivalent certified buildings. We've invested in 13 nonprofits and community facilities, 16 small business incubators, co-working facilities, 6 schools and training centers, and a number of local grocery store healthy food facilities within our neighborhoods in Cleveland. Since 1989, CDA has invested nearly $500 million in 135 projects in greater Cleveland, resulting in 6,750 new housing units and 7 million square feet of commercial commercial space. These projects have generated almost $4 billion in total development. So we've been doing this for about 30 years now. We do big projects, small projects. We look at each project as something more than just what it's going to do for the end user. We look at what it's going to mean for our community. The next two slides actually, will talk about 2 projects that we've invested in. We've invested new markets tax credits and our direct dollars into these projects, and both projects have or are pursuing LEED certification. Glenville Circle North is the first project to advance as part of the City of Cleveland's Neighborhood Transformation Initiative that was put forth by the Mayor of Cleveland. Launched in 2017, the initiative is focused on housing, economic development, and broader quality of life issues in targeted neighborhoods. The goal of the NTI is to invest in disadvantaged communities and neighborhoods just outside growth zones and encourage private market to return back to these areas so that public incentives aren't as needed. Initial efforts are concentrated in neighborhoods that are chosen based on the result of a core redevelopment strategy study done by the City of Cleveland's Planning Commission. The selected areas are in proximity to large anchor institutions like our hospitals, our universities, and so on, that are interested in committing and transforming the neighborhoods they are located in, as well as providing job opportunities to residents. So that's a lot of talk. An example of this would be our county health system, the Metro Health on the west side of Cleveland, that is focusing on creating an eco-district that really is going to take advantage of $1.5 billion of investment that they're going to be investing in their current campus. That in and of itself is a great investment. However, if things don't change within those communities, and if the people of those communities don't feel the positive energy associated with that $1.5 billion, we feel we're all doing an injustice to everybody, and we're really not taking advantage of a massive impact of investment. So this project at Glenville Circle North is kind of a mixed-use project. It is 65 units of housing, mixed income housing, and it's more importantly 13,000 square feet of commercial space that is used for multi-generational entrepreneurship related programs, incubation, taking companies that have good ideas and helping them cultivate their marketing strategy and putting it all together and trying to take them to market. It also provides 6,000 square feet through the Cleveland Citywide Development Corporation to sublease space to minority-owned startup entities on a rotating basis. So hopefully they can start up and then move on and have their own space. That has been in place for about a year, and we're already seeing real results there. Restaurants, food service, and other organizations have really taken advantage of the city's programming there. This is the Children's Museum of Cleveland, another really incredible adaptive reuse of a long-lost gem in Cleveland for really a great result. The Children's Museum of Cleveland in Northeast Ohio is the only museum exclusively dedicated to children ages birth through 8. The CMC acquired and renovated this mansion back in 2014, and if anybody knows anything about Cleveland, we used to have Millionaires Row in Cleveland back in the early 1900s, and obviously that has all since passed. So this is one of the buildings that was remaining from that time. It's 35,000 square feet of interactive exhibit space and other museum amenities. The CMC provides early childhood education and cultural experience for over 100,000 children every year and their families. So it's really had a lot of impact on our community and our neighborhood. Programming partners, which we think is really important, and again talks to the buy-in at the local level, include the Centers for Family and Children, Cleveland State University, Help Me Grow, Cuyahoga County, and the Cuyahoga County Division of Children and Family Services. So all of them are working in partnership with the Children's Museum of Cleveland to effectuate the changes that we're looking to see happen. With that, I will hand that back over to Nicole, and then look forward to your questions.
So how are we enhancing the stakeholder collaboration? We continue to raise awareness level of social equity in all of our programs and development projects to enhance that collaboration by driving conversation among the parties, to drive that public and private partnership, as I think you just heard in the case study with the Cleveland Children's Museum. And collectively, we really need to encourage our developers to take on risk, think outside the lines of a traditional development, mixed-use development for the betterment of our region's neighborhoods, and also to incorporate our architects in the whole process from the beginning throughout every step of the project to further influence the outcome and long-term social impacts. And it really needs to be that iterative process and a long-term approach that we've heard a lot talked about today. So with that, we hope you found our discussion today insightful as we shared some of the work that the Greater Cleveland Partnership and Cleveland Development Advisors has done over many years, collectively striving to make Northeast Ohio a more vibrant, equitable, sustainable, and inclusive area with strong relationships and partners. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, team. That was really great. I just have one clarification and then one question. So for clarification, you mentioned that the Real Estate Initiative has an advisory board that includes representatives that are community members from low-income communities. And from what I got from your presentation is that they actually have a real voice and actually part of the decision-making process themselves, that it's not just they're advised, but they really have a role, that they take ownership. Am I understanding it correctly?
Our community advisory committee meets at least 4 times a year. All of the projects that come in are reviewed and discussed at those meetings. Anything that we are considering investing in, we're running by our CAC in order to really measure primarily the impacts outside of the financial return in order to make a decision as to whether or not we should support that project.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'm actually going to hold on the question and go on to our next presenter, number 2.
Next, we have Gail and Amy from Gensler.
Hi, and I just want to make sure that Amy's actually got control of the slides, so that because only one of us can be in control, so I want to be sure Amy's got it. Otherwise, I'll take over. So, Amy, are you good?
Thank you for now making me the presenter.
Thank you. So, hello everyone, and we're very excited to be participating in the inaugural USGBC Equity Summit, and thank you to the USGBC for this event and this opportunity. We ourselves have already been so inspired by the other presentations, and we look forward to where these types of conversations will take the USGBC. The heart of what we're all saying is very connected. Our talk is literally 4 steps to inclusion, and these are steps that we recommend as USGBC members, organization, and partners that we can take towards more inclusive design. We wanted to start with addressing what exactly we mean when we talk about inclusion. There are so many different definitions and interpretations. And when we think about it from a design perspective, we are typically taking the 2 most common definitions, merging the universal design approach of designing for all without adaptation or specialized knowledge that supports and promotes human performance, health and wellness, and social participation, with the inclusive design approach Kat Holmes refers to as one-size-fits-one design, which aligns with a solution that what needs to be, what it can be in the future.
Our pitch today is to recognize that design professionals, building owners, and tenants traditionally use ourselves as shortcuts to design solutions intended for a larger group of occupants. As such, equitable design of buildings requires a more diverse team's involvement. To get there, we need to do a better job considering and respecting inclusion and finding ways to encourage greater participation from the larger community surrounding us. We have 4 ideas to help the USGBC move in the right direction. But before we go into those steps, we kind of wanted to share a little bit about who we are. Next slide, please.
So this is Gail talking. I'm a licensed architect with 4 decades of experience in building and interiors projects at all scales and on 4 continents. My goal is always to optimize inclusion and performance in the projects that we design today to create resilience for all of us for the future. I'm based in San Francisco, office of Gensler, where I provide sustainability and inclusive design guidance to a wide variety of client projects. I'm the 2020 chair of the AIA Resilience and Adaptation Advisory Group, co-founder with Amy of Gensler's Inclusive Design Network, and an active member of the AIA San Francisco Committee on the Environment. And perhaps most importantly, my in-house consultant is my daughter Tova, who is 27 and was born with intellectual disabilities.
My name is Amy Patchett. I'm a registered interior designer, and I've actually always been passionate about building codes and regulation. I know, a little bit nerdy. I found pretty quickly in my career that codes and standards are really insufficient for providing a good experience for the bulk of people accessing the spaces we design. So for the last 10 years, I've actually been focused on promotion of design solutions that actually will work for everyone, or that's my goal. I love to combine my love of building codes with my passion for universal and inclusive design at Gensler's Toronto office, and I work on a series of projects across Canada and more recently globally. So what we understand to be true is that design professionals who are not exposed to people outside of their own circle do not have the opportunity to create spaces that are meaningful to all. To promote environments that work for everyone, the USGBC needs to reevaluate our own initiatives and commitments to focus on more inclusion. The USGBC actually does have an opportunity to lead by example, and we want to highlight a few solutions that could help showcase inclusion.
So let's start with our first recommended step, step one. And I feel as if it's just amazing that we followed a group that suggested that we have a requirement for one of the social equity credits on every project. That was amazing. So we didn't mean to copy you, but sort of along the same lines of thinking. We're thinking that the first part of this step is to make the inclusive design pilot credit a prerequisite for every LEED project. Designing through the lens of inclusive design with the community engagement that is part of this pilot credit gives us the ability to create an environment without barriers and to promote equal opportunity for everyone. We can leverage this pilot credit to make community inclusion a habit. The pilot credit is very progressive, but it's not impossible. It already has a global alternative compliance path for international projects, and one of the mandatory elements is an operations manual or training, which helps to further promote inclusive design. So let's move this one from pilot to prerequisite. The second part is to make community engagement, as described in our next step, mandatory for LEED credential maintenance. So we suggest that each of us, as part of our credential maintenance, can commit to running at least one green building workshop every year with a local school. Even better, partner with other local USGBC members and community partners and leverage the USGBC's K-12 education content to develop and provide workshops across all grades and class types that include all children. Focus on schools and students who are often left out, such as those in low-income neighborhoods and special day classes. Green building education can be seamlessly woven into existing school curricula to help support overworked teachers. Having the next generation involved early in sustainability will help make them more sustainable, resilient, equitable decision makers later in life. And we learn so much from young people. I'm totally biased on this recommendation. I did green education workshops in my children's schools while they were growing up, including running both of their classroom gardens. So hosting these weekly workshops with my daughter's special day class, and for 11 years with her Girl Scout troop, which was primarily consisted of special day students, was one of the most rewarding experiences in my life. And if you just can't handle the idea of a classroom full of children, which is sometimes a big thing to face, then work with another USGBC member or partner, or three, and help them prepare or document their workshops and report out to the students in the community. But this isn't about a specific product. It's about engaging with the students and the community. And there was a wonderful recommendation earlier that Sanford gave about, being part of the community so that we know who to listen to. And that was really, really inspiring.
The third item is to increase engagement with local municipal code developers. We see a great opportunity to truly increase the engagement with those local municipal code developers. Let's find some more ways to partner with community and professional organizations and find opportunities to increase code minimums that demonstrate clear benefits to the community. The USGBC has a great reputation and has worked to integrate within codes and standards to improve minimum requirements across the board. We should also use this seat at the table to talk about how accessible and inclusive design is part of sustainable design and elevate other voices to identify that current minimums are grossly insufficient to meet the needs of people. Step number 4 is to lead by example. Ensure events and communications shared by USGBC are fully accessible. We know that the USGBC actually does provide accessibility. For example, we heard from our Houston colleague Maria Perez that American Sign Language interpreters were provided for a course taught by her. However, this accessibility is not widely shared or easily visible. I think it's something that you should be proud of, and you should make it easy for people to find so that they can feel included. What we'll need to do first is have an overarching Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee that helps put together a multi-year plan that methodically makes all aspects of the USGBC accessible and ensures our members and guests and partners actually know it. You could do this with 4 different standards. One would be customer service. Establish policies, practices, and procedures on providing goods or services to all people that will help prioritize independence, dignity, integration, and equality of opportunity. Information and communication would be the next one. Make sure that all alternate methods of communication are readily available. Have marketing materials and guidelines that make documentation easily accessible. Talk about the efforts to provide information in multiple formats, and most importantly, let people know that the USGBC is willing to provide them. With the built environment, I think about when we're finally able to meet in person again, we should have set baseline expectations surrounding accessibility of venues that's going to go above minimum code requirements. Work with the Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee to create a checklist that local chapters can use to ensure event spaces meet the needs of current and future members. And for volunteer and membership, the USGBC has such a great level of support from their membership, and it relies on volunteers to make initiatives happen. Have a method for obtaining feedback from volunteers and members that gives a person their voice and to identify any barriers that they may face.
And to recap, so better representation of how to build equity and diversity into our communities can start with promotion of initiatives that showcase the leadership of the USGBC. So we've been very specific about specific ideas we have. These can also act as a frame of reference for members who want to start but may not know where or how. So please join us in encouraging these 4 steps to inclusion at the USGBC, and thank you.
Amazing presentation, ladies. I have a couple questions. Say this approach is completely implemented as you presented. Do you think this disrupts the industry as well as the A&D community, and how?
So I love this question. Yes, we think it does. We feel that often the intent and the heart is there to create big steps forward. But we think that sometimes, and we've seen the USGBC do this even if you think just about lead version 4 and the materials credits. Sometimes we have to take bold steps. Sometimes maybe we step so far that we say, wait a minute, people aren't catching up and we may have to reassess, but that's the process of continuous improvement. And what we see ideally is how this would disrupt the industry and what the ideal outcome would be. We would love to see the USGBC recognized as one of those organizations that is always at the top of the list next to Microsoft or certain other organizations as being one of the most equitable, accessible organizations on the planet. So that's our goal.
Great, thank you all. So we're going to move forward to presentation number 3, Noni, and learning about the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative.
I'm Noni Session. I am the Executive Director of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. We are a democratic, people of color-led, multi-stakeholder cooperative that takes land and housing off of the speculative market to create permanently affordable, community-controlled land and housing. We do this. We are a team, a collective of lawyers, anthropologists, researchers, green building experts, permaculturalists, educators, and activists. We use this combination of expertise to provide technical, financial, and organizational support to frontline communities looking to cooperatively organize, finance, purchase, and steward land and housing in Oakland and the East Bay. I'm going to talk a little bit today, less about how we do it and more about our anatomy and how we're using technical support to build access to equity. Baked into the intentions of our work is the restoration of equity in a wildly inequitable housing market, as is the East Bay and many urban cities nationwide. Part of our work is rapid scaling, so it's important to think about the dynamics happening in other urban areas with rapid racialized and unequal displacement. So we do much of our thinking and much of our technical work with three critical philosophical mission pillars in mind. That is land without landlords, restorative economics, and heal people power. The technical element of land without landlords is taking land permanently off of the speculative market, decommodifying land and housing so as to give communities time to rebuild, redefine, and strengthen a collective community identity and hold that collective assets for generations so communities can build. Our second mission pillar, restorative economics, it references both the invisible and the visible elements needed in communities to rebuild infrastructure, right? There's homes, there's commercial spaces, there's access to community food production, but there's also the invisible elements of which communities have been dispossessed for generations, right? That's social and civic empowerment, that's social networks, that's technical knowledge. Our third mission pillar, Heal People Power, really asks us to look at our internal organizational practices and uproot internal entrenched power practices that create inequity inside of our organizations. So as we're creating more co-ops, seeding more organizations out in our communities, we're not reproducing the same dynamics that generate the need for this work in the first place. As I mentioned, we are a California Cooperative Corporation, and we are a multi-stakeholder co-op. That is in order to both crowdsource resources and spread power across the demographics of our community. We have, if you will, 4 classes of owner. Our first and most important is our community owner. Those are the folks that we organize, look to for our governance mechanism, crowdsource their community expertise, and bring them into our governance circles for community-led projects and community-led activities. Our second category of owner is the investor owner. That is the person who invests in our land and housing projects up to $1,000 at a 1.5% return over a 5-year term. Those folks are really folks who want to be part of the solution as opposed to part of the challenge with rapid displacement, and have $1,000 to offer at a rate that is non-extractive and becomes patient capital instead of capital that rushes for a return on investment. Our next category of owner is the resident owner. This is the person who, in other conditions, would be the renter in perpetuity. However, our resident owners become stakeholders in this process, in that as they pay down what we call the lease share, what in the current system would be rents, they build an equity account. And like the rest of us who are lucky enough to be homeowners, they build up a capital account so that if they would like to buy out of the co-op, they can take that cash elsewhere, put down a payment on a house, seed a business, or another project. The last category of owner is yours truly, and the 8 of us who are working very hard for this project, that is the staff owner. We're the stewards and tend to this mission and do a lot of the heavy lifting on behalf of our owner body. We're a voting organization, and we run all of our decisions through our larger owner body. So this is the 3rd year PREC has been in full motion. We are a pilot project, and we're piloting a model that basically has not been seen before, because what we know needs to happen to really increase equity as we move into this new era of economic configuration in the United States is we need rapid scaling. So when you look across our field, there are lots of folks doing really good, important work as indicative of the presenters even just today. And what we wanted to do is pilot an organization that could house under one roof many of the most impactful elements that we're seeing out in the field today. So we are a movement building organization. We organize our communities around their capacity to determine their own futures in their own neighborhoods and bring them into the developer conversation. We function in some senses like a limited equity housing co-op, except our equity is only limited in a 5% cap in relationship to the market, where folks who pay their lease shares down build capital accounts. So they share in what it means to buy a piece of land and housing. We're an investment co-op. We benefit from an exemption our partner organization, Sustainable Economies Law Center, undertook in about 2015, AB 816, that allows us to sell securities to non-accredited investors up to $1,000. So folks get to invest in the future of their community. We're also working as a community land trust in that through certain bylaws, restrictions, and covenants we make with our resident owners, the land and housing we collectively purchase together is not only permanently off the speculative market, but protected from predatory resale, extractive usage over the life of the acquisition. Finally, as I mentioned, we're also a democratically run worker co-op where we get to do radical power sharing. Although they call me the executive director, we make choices together. So there's no power over there, it's only power together. Our key innovation, as I mentioned, as a California cooperative corporation, is that we're able to sell securities and have created an exemption in the California securities law that allows us to bring a wider scope of our community members into this investment conversation and the movement of capital in our region. So our resident owners who otherwise would be deemed too risky to lend to for land and housing acquisitions, we stand in as a financially fit organization for that risk. So our community projects now have access to capital they never would have had. Our investor owners, they have a restorative investment opportunity with organizations like PREC. We facilitate divestment from Wall Street and other extractive industries, and we are able to include both accredited and non-accredited investors. Accredited investors are those with a net worth of $1 million or more, but there should be an opportunity for every individual to invest in our collective futures. Our third area for our community owners gives them unprecedented control over regional capital movement. How many folks are asked on a daily basis, what should we buy? Where should we develop? What should we change together? So that is the critical vision that we're undertaking in the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative to really bring our communities closer to the mechanisms of transformation. The critical thing we do, if you know that one of the key elements of inequality is the number of times a dollar circulates in a community. And if you're looking at the difference between Black and brown communities and their white counterpart communities, the difference in ratio is like 1 to 11 in favor of the number of times a dollar circulates in the white counterpart communities versus Black and brown communities. And that's pretty extreme. And what we're doing with the way that we structure our land and housing projects is we're cutting out the extractive middleman, if you will. Folks, we the people, invest in our land and housing projects, which flows through PREC, where we put together capital stacks. We prepare our community owners for property ownership through collective governance, nonviolent, and sustainable ways to asset manage. We build out these projects for them, and as they move in as resident owners, they build their equity accounts, and the return on investment goes back to the community members who believed in and supported the project from the outset. So our key theory of change is that it is technical support that offers radical, long-term, and sustainable change. People must be reinvested with their own power to create ripples throughout our community. They must be reinvested with their own access that does not, in perpetuity, have to be circulated through an organization as the power holder. So we've structured our internal organization through several circles that you can see here. There's the People Circle that really does a lot of the movement building through technical support, where we support with community engagement, program envisioning, building an investment campaign for each acquisition with our community owners. We have internal and external education, where we go out and inform philanthropic lenders, mission-aligned banks, those who are looking to really join in effectively on just transition, the minimum technical inputs one must build into our process in order to truly say we're supporting a community-led endeavor. We create materials that support this, educational materials that support this. We have our an internal education, where as we bring more of our community owners and resident owners into the fold, we're keeping them informed, helping them understand what the nature of this development conversation is, and making sure they're activated around our civic futures. All of this is helped through our project circles that escorts a project from visioning to, as you see at the end of the timeline, the stable autonomous co-op. What you don't see in the background is our financial circle, where we are aligning investors, lenders, CDFIs, and getting them ready to invest in the vision that we're building with our community owners. So each project is sustainable, each project offers a modest return on investment, and we're creating our collective futures together. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Wow, Noni, I could spend the rest of the summit just wrapping my mind around that. I wish I could just transport that model and put it here in the gallery and get big things done. It's amazing. What I see is if a model such as this were adapted large scale, it could really impact a paradigm shift that would be very exciting in terms of direct development not being used, as you said, for extracting value, but for creating value with the community and for the community and keeping that value therein. So I'm going to ask a high-level question, and you can answer it now, or you can save it for later, or we can dig into it in one of our breakout sessions. But with this knowledge and this experience, what is your major push to USGBC? What is your ask? What is your if you had an instruction, for example, what would it be? Because this is the way we want to go. So how can we fit that into USGBC and our work as a USGBC family?
Yes. One of the key. Okay. Hello. Okay. Cool. One of the key issues that we have had to confront from the very outset is the cost of projects. And we've worked in a few strategies to keep down the cost of projects, such as running our staff collective, our operations philanthropically, while we reserve our investment capitals just for the cost of projects. When you talk to a lot of mainstream developers, what we're told is that many of these projects don't, quote unquote, pencil out to create affordability. But there's almost a black box around what that really means technically, what that looks like. There are a lot of questions that yet have been taken for granted and still need to be answered. Are we front-loading profit, 22% profit at the front of a project? Could we source materials more cheaply? Is there a way for new builds or rehabs to be licensed in a way that we can bring down the cost, potentially through things like community workshops or through partnering with organizations that have nascent developers or nascent construction cooperatives? So I think that the U.S. Green Building Council would really benefit this budding vision of community-led projects through opening the doors of information, if you will, to the different elements of projects and how you can move certain pieces around to create both a more affordable project and a more accessible project, right? So accessibility to the technicals is the exact difference between affordability and non-affordability.
Thank you. That was amazing. We're going to move on to our next presentation, Ganesh, who will be discussing incorporating disability into design. Take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about equity in design and rethinking disability within that framework. My name is Ganesh Nayak. I'm an architect and a sustainability consultant here in Marietta, Georgia, in the Atlanta area. And I have an 18-year-old son, Ishan, who has developmental disabilities. And as he has grown over the years, my perspective on architecture, sustainability, and of course, life itself has changed, looking through the lens of disability and through his lens, actually, taking care of him full time. So it is this perspective that I hope to bring to this presentation. And my involvement, being a father of a kid with disabilities has also allowed me to engage deeply with the disability community over these years. And I've spent about 5 years on the State Advisory Panel for Special Education in Georgia, and I'll be chairing that panel from the next academic year. I'm also the chair of the AIA Court, Atlanta Court. So I have a pretty good kind of involvement with the sustainability community as well. So going to the next slide. So what does social equity mean, at least to me, and what does it mean in the context of this presentation? So there are various ways of looking at social equity, and to me, I've always employed the concept of otherness. So otherness, that is people who are not like us, and when I say not like us, it always kind of means the so-called dominant us, but we'll not get into that discussion here. But there are always, there are various forms of otherness that seek social equity because they are more towards the margins than to the center. And those groups are in the category of race and color and gender and immigration and class and sexuality and caste in some countries. So the main thing about social equity here is that we need to recognize these differences of otherness and also reduce the distance from the other. So one of the UN Sustainable Design Group goals is reduced inequalities, which actually means reducing the distance from the other in this context. Now, another aspect of otherness, which I want to emphasize here, is a pretty important calibration here. The state of otherness, whether it is gender, disability, etc., it's a natural and it's part of the human experience. It is not a problem that needs to be fixed, and that's one of the key things which we want to remember as we move forward. So, what is social equity in the field of disability here? The main thing here is inclusion, and I'm basically repeating what Amy and Gail have been talking about, but let me just reframe it from my viewpoint here. So inclusion, it is not just getting a foot in the door, as we think that the people with disabilities need to get into, but it needs a lot of calibration. So inclusion is not forced in a patronizing manner on people with disabilities, but that experience should be seamless and natural. So it really should not be just representational, as we treat people with differences, but it really should be seamless. The other aspect is visibility, and the main aspect of normalcy, the so-called normalcy which people with disabilities cherish, and which so many people have expressed, is being visible in public space. The feelings of being lesser to the other person who's more normal and that of shame are increased when spaces are not consciously designed, and hence people with disabilities are made less visible and feel more segregated. So these are a couple of very important points which I wanted to make, that is inclusion and visibility in the context of social equity for disabled people. A brief history about the ADA. And the ADA turns 30 years this year, and when it was signed into law, it was an absolutely landmark legislation, and it gave us the basic right to live in the world, and it has altered our environments forever. And then so the ADA is law. But whereas universal design is another landmark movement within the design community, which the end goal is to accommodate the broadest spectrum of human ability. But the point is, the point which I want to make in this presentation is that how do we go beyond ADA and even beyond universal design to make it a truly inclusive environment? And it's something which I've been grappling for quite a while. And the example I want to take is from a very personal example of my son Ishan's school. It was his. He's now 18, and I think he was in his elementary school for about a year when he was 6 or 7, and even now. Of course, the teachers were exemplary, but even now, people stop to talk to him when they meet him in the community, in the grocery stores, etc. And the only reason which I see was because of the visibility which the design of the school itself afforded. Because here in this school, there is it's a multi-level school which is connected by a wide ramp, which constituted the primary circulation in the whole school, and the stairs were secondary. And the reason for visibility and recognition that is life-affirming for a person with disabilities is a reimagined design of the school. The important thing to note is that the ramp is integral to the design, and it is not an add-on to make sure that people with disability in a wheelchair get in. And it is not tucked in a corner. And another thing about classrooms, special needs classrooms, is that they are always tucked in a corner, and that is by program and not by design. But that's something which we need to address as designers and champions of equity. Another big thing to remember here is that, and this point cannot be made enough, that everyone benefits from increased visibility of people with disabilities, because it is key to developing empathy with the other, and thus you reduce the distance with the otherness. So when we design for equity, we are actually designing for everybody. The next one, which I wanted to talk about. So how do we enfold this design for disability in USGBC? And here I think I'm merely repeating what Amy and Gail had talked about 2 presentations back. But one of the main things which USGBC can do is to incentivize the design for disability, which goes much beyond ADA and even beyond universal design. So how do we do that? Again, this is kind of piggybacking on that proposal, I guess, but I didn't see that. We introduce a prerequisite, for example, if there are at least 2 features which demonstrate design for disability, which is way beyond code, and definitely more than that for schools. And then we address disability in lead credits across the rating systems, for instance, in integrative process and site analysis, and maybe have some innovation credits. And also in education, make it a requirement in credential maintenance, maybe a couple of hours over 2 years or something. But these are some prescriptive things which we can do in USGBC today. And then social equity, how is it different for USGBC? Is an extremely important point which we need to make sure we go beyond green buildings, because sustainability is much more than green building or healthy materials and energy efficiency. And I say that truly sustainable spaces are truly inclusive and accessible spaces. So if I like that artwork, that sculpture, because it kind of illustrates what I want to say. Because sustainability on a holistic level is really closer to life itself, and it is more of a braid. We think of it as 3 or 4-legged stools, but I think it is more of a braid of different interconnected threads, and these threads may be, putting into energy efficiency and materials and equity and economy and aesthetics. It's a dynamic braid which keeps changing, and some threads may not be there all the time, but that really should be our ideal as social equity champions within USGBC. And that's all I have right now. So, any questions?
Thank you, Ganesh. That was amazing. I have one question. Does this approach work for the existing buildings as well as new construction?
Yes, it certainly does, because what we are talking about is we are talking about a change in design mindset, which integrates disability in any design move, right? So we're talking about disability being second nature to thinking. I mean, thinking about disability as second nature in design thinking. So once we make that second nature, we'll see these principles suffused throughout the design in whatever scale, whether it is a small remodel or a substantial remodel. So yes, I mean, of course, in new construction, it is definitely easier to incorporate these things, but it definitely need not be excluded in existing buildings.
Gina, do you have anything else specific for
I just want to note that I'm so happy that we heard different versions of a similar proposal. That's actually a strong point, not one to wish didn't happen. I think it's great to reiterate, and this is such an important issue. I just want to take a question that has been posed that says, what would it take to scale equitable access? What policy and other changes are needed? So I want to pose that to our panel.
So go ahead, Ganesh.
No, go ahead. I was just still thinking of stuff. So.
Well, me as well. I guess I was thinking about equitable very broadly, but if we think about it in the terms that you and Amy and I often talk about it, scaling it is something where I think we so often first hear, oh, it's not possible because it's expensive or it's physically difficult. We don't deny that that's often the case, but we also don't want to underestimate the creativity of design professionals. And I think, personally, I have seen more creative, equitable access done almost on a shoestring by a small community that had to make equitable access a part of what they did than perhaps we've even seen on very big budget, big projects. And I think part of it that I love, and I will put this back to Ganesh and Amy, is that visibility is key. And I mean, I was in tears when Ganesh was mentioning the special day classes are often tucked away so that other students don't have to see the special day students. So I think visibility is the first part to scaling, because when we perceive that we're all part of a community, there is the kind of response that Ganesh mentioned happens with his son when people just, oh, this is part of who my community is, and then that makes it unacceptable to exclude them or refuse to have access for them or us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Ganesh. I think that we should all be really good friends after this. But I was also thinking that I really struggle with the fact that design professionals are really not learning about inclusive design priorities in their school education. It's a big, big miss. And they think that when they graduate that they can design to the building code and that they will meet the needs, or the ADA in the US. And without people kind of championing better solutions, like we're actually missing the mark, and we just perpetually are creating more generations of design professionals who, if they haven't directly come into contact with somebody that might experience the built environment differently or have a disability, they're not thinking about that. So I try to usually, when I have a new class of design professionals, starting at my firm, I say, okay, have you ever taken your grandparent or something out for dinner? And, where did you take them? What were the obstacles? Try not to repeat that in your first project. And so I saw there was kind of a question about, or I think maybe it was Sarah Jennifer asked about like whether or not it could be effective for also existing buildings. And I think that's the biggest hurdle, to tell you the truth. Our existing infrastructure needs to be addressed wholeheartedly. It even takes more of a creative talent to be able to do it properly and integrate.
Correct. I absolutely agree. Yes. The thing about from my experience of working in design and architectural offices is that the ADA is taken as another hurdle, a regulatory hurdle to cross. So we are so caught up in the technicalities of the slope and the ramp and all of that we fail to look at the larger picture of access, of beauty actually, and how it is integrated within the context. And I think that's something which can come only with a lot of empathy actually, and it's something which I don't think our students are getting enough. Yes, I agree with that, Amy.
Thank you, panel. I'm going to pose another one. This question was asked to Noni. Noni, I'll give you a second to unmute. When LEED is addressing the life cycle of the space in the new version 4, there's no inclusion of how ownership of spaces transfers when the occupant vacates the space. Based on your experience, how can we rope this principle into LEED evaluation of the life cycle of space and properties?
Oh, okay, maybe you go on mute. Okay, cool. Thank you. I got that question from a couple of folks, and I'm actually interested to chat more about it. But off of my experience with how space is or is not inherited in Oakland in general, it seems like if in fact LEED is a cyclical renewal process, it seems like maybe one could reduce the accreditation score if certain benchmarks or point systems for equity access goes down, right? Like if the LEED certification was maybe not just a certified or not certified, but could be a ranked score where one meets several sort of scatter plot benchmarks around access. And that might be able to then sort of nuance LEED certification depending on which areas a person is stronger or less strong in. So.
Great, thank you. And I'll just leave a little nugget that kind of ties into the equity scorecard that Social Equity Working Group was talking about earlier, but I'm sure we'll have more to discuss on that in our breakout sessions. Sarah, do you want to take a final question before you wrap it up?
Sure, I think we have a couple more minutes. A question for Nicole was, what kind of elements are in the community benefit agreement?
Actually, that's really a question for Steve, unfortunately, and he had to jump off of the call today. Gina, are you able to answer that at all?
Yeah, I can touch on it a bit, not in probably the detail he can, but we include both participation of workers, women and people of color, as well as local hiring, and then we also look at it with the suppliers as well, looking at businesses owned by people of color, women-owned businesses, and locally owned businesses. That's typically in our community what we're looking at. So CDA, where Steve was talking from, the organization that he represents, they have a checklist with specifications and ask that each project owner puts the requirements in the CBA.
What would it take to advocate for better enforcement implementation of ADA and a better benchmark that goes beyond ADA? Are there designers, planners, architects already organizing together about this?
So I think we put it in the chat, but there is the Inclusive Design and Environmental Access Center at the University of Buffalo is an amazing center for research and advancement. They also have developed a universal design. And by this, I guess the way that we define it at Gensler, at least, it isn't quite inclusive design, but it is well beyond ADA. They have a universal design checklist rating system, and you can get a certification. You can self-certify for $500, so it's relatively accessible as a rating system. And I mean, we would absolutely love to see USGBC and the Idea Center, partner self-reference, or cross-reference more often. And excuse me, so they are really leading the way.
I think I would add too that if the USGBC had the capacity to build an accessibility advisory committee of some sort, then that could help act as a resource hub for people that have questions that they just don't actually know. A lot of design professionals do want to do the best that they can give. And in new construction is the best chance we have to do it right. So if there was a body of people that could actually provide that kind of guidance and give a framework of reference, it is very personal. Every person has a different story with disability, and I really applaud Ganesh for sharing his personal story too, because I think we are all impacted by it at some point in our lives, like you said. And so we just need better access to people that can share that kind of information and translate it into design.
Sure. I think one of the things is to break away from the mindset that ADA is, ADA and even universal design is kind of the limits to good accessible design, and I think we can do that only by. Not only by, but one of the first things to do is to really empathize with the person with disabilities and see how they, with different disabilities actually, whether it is sensory or wheelchair bound or whatever it is, and see how they go through potentially through the space and see how what they feel, etc. So that's the kind of thing which we need to look at beyond making ramps, etc. So.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists today, as well as the USGBC. Your work is improving lives and changing green buildings, cities, and communities for the better, which we also desperately need. As community builders, we understand the interconnectedness between people and places. The impact we have on society is immeasurable, which is why we have the responsibility to remove systemic barriers, not only in green building, but its associated disciplines. We must support innovation while creating a greater sense of belonging and purpose. Let's influence and mentor younger generations. Advocate for someone who is different from you. As most of you, I continue to reflect on what's going on in the world. We're in the midst of a pandemic, which is spotlighting the health inequities, which already existed here in the U.S. Last month, 1/3 of Americans did not pay their rent, fueling the existing housing and homelessness crisis. And I'm sad to say I don't think May's numbers will be much better. And George Floyd was brutally killed by Minneapolis police officers. I challenge you to not just champion equity in your work, but every day in your personal life. Use your privilege and influence to right the wrongs. We stand in a really unique position to make a change. Thank you. Awesome presentations today.
Wow, that was awesome. You guys spurred a lot of chats in the chat function related to equitable access. So thank you to our presenters. You really illuminated several ways that we can increase access, from removing economic disparities to designing for people with various needs and challenging models of ownership in real estate at a fundamental level.